Have you ever been laughed at for trying to be more than people expected of you? Have you felt the heat of eyes waiting for you to fail? Imagine a ballroom under chandeliers, the music slow and dangerous, and a millionaire's smirk sharp enough to cut. She worked as a maid, hired to clean marble floors and keep other people's celebrations spotless. He was the kind of man whose name filled columns, tailored suits, and a laugh that sliced. The night they met, the room smelled of roses and old money. Waitstaff moved like shadows. Guests traded compliments like currency. She carried a tray and a quiet heart. When her hand brushed his cuff, the contact was tiny but explosive. He looked down and saw a maid. A smile landed on his face, honed into cruelty by habit. "If I dance with her, will she keep up?" he said loud enough for the cluster nearby to hear. Laughter fluttered like a cruel breeze. Instead of shrinking, she stayed. She had learned not to be invisible. The organizer announced the floor was open and, with a theatrical flourish, he offered a challenge. "If she dances the tango with me and doesn't make a fool of herself, I'll marry her." The room shifted. For him, it was a joke. For her, it was a strange, heavy offer that suddenly made her visible. She had learned rhythm in small, private ways, dancing alone in the kitchen to late-night radio, turning chores into steps. Tango is a conversation, not a trick. She closed her eyes and let the music remember her. He led with the arrogance of a man who believed he could control any scene. She followed without begging. At first, the room expected humiliation. Then her movements, honest, untrained, precise, began to change the narrative. She moved like someone who carried burdens with balance. The more he tried to expose her, the more she turned stumbles into dramatic poise. The audience's laughter dimmed and curiosity sharpened. He spun her under his arm in a move meant to display her as spectacle. She landed with a smile that had no apology. The crowd's tone shifted into admiration. Cameras flashed. His brittle laughter tried to reclaim the moment, but the applause that rose begrudgingly admitted another truth. Presence can outshine privilege. After the gala, a clip of the dance ricocheted across feeds. The public debated class and dignity. He attempted damage control with staged interviews and jokes. People gave instead, donations to help her daughter, messages of support. The city watched a man who had used ridicule as a shield begin to look small under scrutiny. A journalist found her at work. She answered questions with the calm of someone who values privacy. She spoke about her daughter, the long shifts, and how the radio in the kitchen had taught her to keep time. She did not seek attention. She wanted steady work and school fees. Weeks later, at another event, he found her again. This time he asked not to perform, but to understand. He asked how she learned to dance. Seeing her in the ordinary light of a kitchen, he recognized a life he'd dismissed as a costume. He saw a woman who had earned her dignity in ways money could not buy. What followed was messy and real. He started a scholarship at his foundation to help working parents. He showed up at community centers and listened. She navigated offers that came with strings, accepting some and refusing others. They began to talk, first awkwardly, then with a curious tenderness. He learned humility the blunt way. She learned to accept help on her terms. Months later, he proposed, privately, without cameras or wagers. She did not give an immediate yes. She negotiated respect, fairness, commitment to her daughter's security. He agreed. They married in a small ceremony, not for spectacle, but because two people chose it. She had a name, of course, one that never appeared on event programs or glossy pages. She used it quietly, a private insistence when the world offered labels instead. Her mornings began before dawn, a routine of buses, babies, and brooms. Mornings smelled of instant coffee and the small, stubborn optimism parents tuck into lunchboxes. Nights were for tucking covers around a sleeping child and folding bills into neat, pragmatic stacks. Dance, for her, was not performance but prayer. He had a name that people bowed toward. It opened doors, smoothed transactions, and offered the kind of safety that never had to be earned. His life had been a series of acquisitions, companies, friends, artworks, things that shimmered but did not argue back. He'd learned to test people with humor, to find their edges and press. It was how he maintained distance. That night, the edges pressed back in a way he had not planned. The charity organizers spun the gala into a narrative, presented anecdotes to the press, and cleaned the guest list afterward. The clip of that tango sat on timelines and talk shows, dissected and replayed. Some commentators celebrated the spectacle as an example of unlikely grace. Others criticized him for a cruel joke. But for many, the conversation became less about him and more about what dignity looks like when it refuses to bend. Her daughter watched the clip at school. At first, she couldn't understand why people were so excited about a woman sweeping floors. Then she saw her mother on the screen, moving calm and fierce. Pride replaced confusion. Children of working parents learn to measure value in smaller, truer units. How late mom works, whether dinner is warm, whether hugs are there after a long day. Pride in a clip does not change bills on a counter, but it changed the way her daughter saw the woman who had always been her whole world. Gifts started arriving. Letters, small packages, offers to help school fees. A local seamstress made a dress for her daughter without charge. A music teacher offered free lessons. It was the city's small kindnesses, the kind that stacked to make daylight. She accepted some help and declined other offers that felt performative. She learned to read intention the way she scanned rooms for hazards. For him, the public reaction was an unfamiliar mirror. He had been used to headlines that complimented him. Suddenly, the mirror showed someone who wielded power carelessly. The first time he watched the unedited footage, he felt something like vertigo. Seeing the way she refused to be made small made him aware of how often his jokes had been surgical. He apologized at first with a staged statement, then with a handwritten note, and finally with action. Action, not apology, became important. He funded an educational program for single parents, creating scholarships and apprenticeships at his companies. He signed checks and attended meetings without cameras, learning the bureaucracy of real help. He met with community leaders and listened. People called him sincere, calculating, embarrassed. Labels didn't matter to the woman whose life was affected. The program meant her daughter could apply for a school she had only seen in a brochure. There were setbacks. A tabloid printed a rumor that she took advantage of charity. A former colleague suggested the millionaire had ulterior motives. She ignored the noise that wanted to define her. She knew the difference between offers that helped and performances that humiliated. She negotiated employment offers so they would include training and sufficient hours, not just a title with no substance. She knew too well how promises can be gilded cages. When they started spending time together, it was awkward. He had to learn how to sit without commanding a room. She had to learn how to accept generosity without losing autonomy. They argued about small things: overcooked rice, the right temperature for her daughter's bath. These mundane fights were the stitchwork of a life being sewn together, not the sort of moments that make for sensational headlines. At the wedding, a neighbor from her building baked a cake. A coworker brought flowers. He wore a suit that was slightly too casual for his usual standards. There were no photographers in extravagant poses, only faces of people who had mattered in uncelebrated ways. He squeezed her hand beneath the table and mouthed a laugh that carried apology and promise. She smiled back with a steadiness that had nothing to do with flash. In the years after, their charity work grew into a small foundation that emphasized dignity, employment with training, childcare stipends, and music programs for children in low-income neighborhoods. She led some of those programs, teaching parents how to find rhythm in daily life, translating the joy she'd long kept private into something communal. He learned to step back, to let programs be run by people with lived experience rather than consultants who were tastemakers in shiny shoes. The city changed slowly. People who had laughed that night felt the discomfort return when they witnessed the consequences of their own amusement. Conversations shifted from, "Did you see the joke?" to "What did we expect to prove by laughing?" Classrooms and offices hosted debates about power and performance. A community center hung a photo of the tango on the wall, not as mockery nor as monument, but as a reminder that dignity is visible. She once stood in front of a classroom with new mothers and told them about small dances, how to reclaim time, how to fold work into music. She spoke without bitterness and with practical advice. Parents left with flyers for training programs and earbuds that connected them to recorded lessons. It was work that stitched wounds slowly. When interviewers asked what the moment had taught her, she said simply, "Dignity is not for sale." When they asked him, he spoke about humility and the limits of wealth. Both answers were true but incomplete. The full lesson was a tapestry of small, stubborn changes: a scholarship that paid for a science kit, A neighbor who stopped making jokes about knowing her place. A daughter who grew up seeing that her mother's worth was not tied to a suit. People still remember the glittering night, but they remember it less for the wager and more for what it revealed. Things that are offered as entertainment can expose real wounds. Things that look like humiliation can become mirrors. The man who intended a spectacle discovered the cost of spectacle on the soul. The woman who refused humiliation found a kind of power that didn't need an audience. So next time you hear someone try to make another person small for the sake of a laugh, remember the tango. Notice who keeps their head high. Notice who turns a stumble into a step. Sometimes the bravest thing is to keep moving. If you were there, what step would you choose to take next, and why would you take it?